Hi,
Hello.
Welcome.
good to see you.
You too.
Great to meet you.
You. My name's Jim.
Good. Just getting some water here. I'll be right
Oh,
back.
yeah.
Just getting there, so I'd like to have some water. Okay.
My name is Gordon.
Hi, how are you?
Good to meet you.
Hi.
I'm Sean.
Okay, great. Wonderful.
I'm Chris.
Hi, Chris.
I'm Alan Marcus.
Hi, how are you doing?
Doing well.
So, we're kind of wondering how long you wanted to stick around today.
Okay, now what all did you want to talk about today?
We were just gonna ask you if you wanted to talk about yourself and your life.
Yep, I can do that. I can do a short presentation and then probably let's kind of turn it into this sort of interactive discussion. And now, are there other people online, or is it just going to be a small group?
It's
just
just
us.
Yeah, right now. Unless
Okay, well, I can tell some about myself a little bit, and then I'm a professor of animal science at Colorado State University. I've been there for 32 years. And when I was a very young child, I had no speech till age 4. I was very lucky to get into, okay, well, yeah, I want to see everybody's pictures. I was
okay.
lucky. Yeah, why don't you put it back on gallery, the way you had it. Okay, I was very lucky to get into a really early intervention program. That was very helpful for me. And my mother always encouraged my ability in art, the things I was good at. That was really helpful. I had a lot of problems in high school: bullying, teasing, horrible, worst part of my life. A regular high school didn't work for me. I actually got kicked out for throwing a book. And ended up going to special school. They put me to work cleaning horse stalls and running the horse barn. And so I learned how to work. But I really want to thank the very, very good teachers I had. Great science teacher, super, super good. Good teachers really helped me. That was very, very important for me. So why don't you just start asking me some questions?
All right.
We've been looking
looks
forward
like
to. I'm sorry, Jim.
our friend Cheney. I'm gonna let our friend Cheney come in here.
Okay, all right.
What were you saying, Gordy?
Oh, I wanted to ask you, particularly a lot of. I want to hear a lot about the animal communication, like how you develop this idea of just being on the animals' wavelength, and how you're understanding them because you got down on their level, and also how that relates to how you understood how understanding other people, trying to be on their level, maybe.
Well, I'm an extreme visual thinker. In fact, I've talked about it in my new book, Visual Thinking. Also in my old book, Thinking in Pictures. Everything I think about is a picture. Now, the thing is, autism comes in different types. You can have the object visualizer like me. You can have the more mathematical mind. That's a pattern thinker, or a verbal thinker. And animals do not have words. They do not live in a verbal world. And since I was a visual thinker, thought in pictures, the first thing I did when I started working with cattle was to get in the chutes and see what they were seeing. And they were afraid of things like reflections and shadows and a rope hanging down. I mean, stuff we wouldn't even notice. And I didn't know that a lot of other people think in words until I was in my late 30s. And that was a shock to find out that everybody did not think the same way I did. And I was just on a Zoom call with some other people that I don't, where I think they were having a little bit of a hard time understanding what visual thinking is. It's all my thoughts are pictures.
Right. Do you feel like that's what allowed
That
you to
help me work with animals, because
Right.
animals don't think in words. All their memories, all their experiences, everything has to be sensory. Smells, sound of the vocalizations of other animals, seeing things. touch sensations. It's a sensory world, not a verbal world. But some people are very, very verbal. So they have a hard time understanding maybe nonverbal thinking. Also, visual thinkers like me, and I worked with a bunch of them, can't do algebra, and are very good with mechanical devices. I worked with many people that owned big metal shops, patented lots of mechanical devices, sold them around the world, but they cannot do algebra.
Yeah, algebra's rough.
I struggled with it, yeah, because I was visual myself when I was younger, in high school, and I think math was like pulling teeth. It was rough. It was very difficult to conceptualize, and until I took geometry.
Well,
Because
geometry I never got to take, but I've heard this pattern over and over again. Some of the ones that can't do algebra do a lot better in geometry, especially if you can relate the geometry back to some real things.
Mhm. Yeah, it actually makes sense because you can see it. It's like, oh,
That's
those
right, because you
numbers
can
have
see it.
meaning.
That's right. See, in the algebra, there's nothing to see.
No, it's hypothetical.
Yeah, it's very, very abstract. And
It seems like you would have a lot of natural sculpting skills, sculpting ability inside your brain.
well,
Do
I
you
can
like to
see
make
things.
art?
If I think about going to the supermarket, I'm seeing the supermarket right now, and I'm over this wooden box thing. I keep the apples on. And now I'm touching an apple. I see it first, but then I can touch it. And I've learned once you touch an apple, you pick that apple unless it's got a bruise on it. You don't paw over the apples on the rack.
Now you've said that high school is probably the worst for most people. I would think. I mean, it was never definitely one of my favorite times of life.
It was my worst
Yeah.
part of my life. Worst
And
part of my life was high school.
And I think a lot of times, especially with the autistic world, is not. The world isn't nice to an autistic mind. It's not gentle, and it's very hard to fit in and even understand yourself, let alone each other. And in the autistic mind, where you don't understand each other anyway,
Yeah,
that compounds into this period of life that's like it's compounding another trauma on top of trying to deal with your own kind of existence. And could you talk about how that like kind of shaped you?
well, the only place where I had friends in high school was friends who shared interests. That's where
Right.
I had friends. Horseback riding, model rockets, and electronics. You know, when autistic kids had a good time in high school, I remember talking to one mom, and she said, "My son's doing well in high school. He's in the school band, and he loves it." See, that's an example of friends who shared interests. I think that's really important.
Absolutely.
The other thing that's made my life have a good life is I've had a very interesting career, gotten to do all kinds of interesting things. And I want to see other young autistic individuals get into careers they really liked. Because some of these people I worked with that owned these metal fabrication shops, they were definitely undiagnosed autistics. And they had like 20 patents each. And the things they are made are still being sold around the world.
I'm glad you brought that up, the undiagnosed autistics, because I feel like we've got a lot of adults in our lives, and I've worked in tech most of my career, and a lot of those guys, these fantastic engineers that can see things that I just could not see, but working in fabrication, I would have these guys like ex-NASA engineers working out an engineering problem, but they aren't actually getting down and making the circuit board or whatever it is that we were making. And until you actually got your hands on and doing it. I've heard you talk about this too, how important it is to actually get kids and adults actually working on the thing, so they have the actual physical knowledge of that, not just the abstractions.
Well,
I think that's
that's
pretty
really
important.
important. And I worked with a lot of big meat companies, and I observed a very interesting division of labor in engineering. The university trained engineers who do boilers and refrigeration, that requires a lot of mathematics to do, electrical requirements, things like that. But then the people working in the shop, I call that the clever engineering department, they were making all the mechanical devices, which the degreed engineers were not making, because they were my kind of mind, an object visualizer that can just see how mechanical things work. And I've seen that in many, many different places. And where the degreed engineer has to have lots of mathematics and things like that, I had to drop a physics class because I couldn't do that mathematics. But I think a lot of people don't realize just how much design work and stuff was being done in the shop. And then you'd have a person who had a 1-semester class in computer-aided drafting, hired by one of the companies. This was back in the early 90s, because he showed his homework assignment to some shop people, and he laid out 3 beef plants. And he did a very good job at it.
It's a very interesting
Cool.
place to explore the ideas of food processing facilities and maybe moving to automation. I know that you had created a cattle dip, sort of. What would you call
I
that?
worked on the cattle dipping vats, but I've done a lot of, layout of cattle handling facilities. And right now, a lot of mechanical equipment's coming from Europe. And it
Okay.
goes back to our educational system. In 9th grade, the kid can go university or tech route, and they don't look at the tech route as sort of a lesser form of intelligence. And that's why the US is not making the state-of-the-art electronic chip making machine. The
Mhm.
physics for that machine was done here at one of our universities.
And are more of these processing facilities moving towards automation and employing fewer human workers? How has that changed?
Well, there's a lot of things they're trying to automate. They're just finishing up on a gigantic warehouse here that's going to be all automated. And I went shopping for the equipment for that type of warehouse. It was coming from outside the US. And because a lot of that stuff is mechanical. And we have a lot of kids today that are just playing video games, and the one thing that can get them off the video games is things like working on cars and working on mechanical things, and they find that's more interesting. We need people to fix elevators. They're all turning gray. Take a look the next time you see somebody working on an elevator.
Or making shoes or hats or the trades that
Yeah, and I'm not talking about the real high-end skilled trades. I'm not talking about roofing and laying asphalt. That's just hard
right.
work. I'm talking about the real high-end skilled trades that are inventing things,
Innovation.
innovation, and then also people to fix things. You see, people say, oh, computers will just control everything. Well, a lot of this equipment is mechanical devices controlled by a computer. An elevator is a mechanical device. Either works with a big hydraulic cylinder or cables and counterweights. It's controlled by
funny,
a computer. It's not a computer. There's a big difference.
I randomly saw an elevator repair truck today drive by my house in my front yard. And I live in a very small town with not very many big buildings and not very many elevators. And I've never seen an elevator repair truck in my entire life until today. And it was just like right before coming to talk to you. It's kind of a funny coincidence.
Okay, well, there's some people having elevators put in, for seniors living in a house, to put in a small elevator or a lift that goes up the stairs. An elevator company would do that.
Yeah, I used
That
to
makes
work in that
sense.
industry, helping people with disabilities, and that was we would usually refer out to a company that would install stair lifts and small elevators, sometimes at churches or community centers also.
That's right. That's right. And it may be one floor, but they really need that elevator.
Right. It makes all the difference in the world in
Oh,
people
absolutely.
either not having access or being terrified to be helped up and down stairs in a way that's not necessarily safe or natural at all. So,
No, that's absolutely right.
so Temple, I've realized something recently about myself, that I've never been what they call on the spectrum with any of the autistic or what they used to call Asperger's type stuff, but I've always struggled with undiagnosed ADHD or ADD symptoms, where I have a hyper focus and I
Yep.
have a lot of varied interests that come and go, and so I end up with clutter and piles of things, and I struggle to remain very organized. And I recently, in the last few months, have seen that compared to autism as being kind of hand in hand, as still being. And I do have a lot of friends who have autistic qualities. Whether they're diagnosed or not really isn't important. You can kind of get a feel for that thing.
Well, autism and ADHD have a lot of crossover. Genetic.
Yeah, and I've just recently
brains
realized
and-
that, and so
Yeah.
I was going to invite you to I guess just to speak on that at all, what you think of it, because to me it's brand new, and it actually gave me a great sense of comfort, because you do feel isolated with anything that puts you outside the norm. And I've always felt like I'm just kind of a mess, and that I just have to deal with it. And I've worked hard with my ADHD to make it work for me and not see it as a disability or a problem. But the fact that it put me in the same category with the autists actually made me feel comfort and joy, if that
Well,
makes sense.
that's good. And ADHD and autism diagnoses are mixed up all the time, all the time.
I wanted to ask too, if you could reflect on, I heard recently that CPTSD has kind of those symptoms as well. Like there's kind of, I think, maybe a lot of crossover between that and autism.
Between what, PTSD you were saying?
Yes. I heard that recently, that complex PTSD has a lot of crossover symptoms
Well,
with
one of the
ADHD
things that
and
happens
autism.
in PTSD is especially if there's been brain, head injury in any way,
Right.
that tends to reduce inhibition. It gets harder to inhibit a response. And sometimes that's a problem in autism. When I was a young child, there was a lot of emphasis on learning how to wait and take turns at games, how to inhibit a response. We played lots and lots of board games, and I had to learn to wait my turn. And so that might be a symptom that's similar, is sort of a hyper arousal. I had horrible problems with anxiety, got worse and worse and worse through my 20s. And then in this book, this 26 years old, Thinking in Pictures, I described successful use of antidepressant drugs. I have been on them for 40 years. And when I was in my early 30s, my health was coming apart, colitis that wouldn't stop, and everything I ate went through me. And I went on a low dose of an antidepressant, and the colitis cleared up. 90%. It's not, I still have a little bit of it, 90% cleared up. Because my body, and this would be a neurological problem I was born with, constant state of hyperarousal. And you see a PTSD is also in a state of hyperarousal, but that's caused by either head injury or stressing the nervous system so much that it stays in hyperarousal.
Right. So you're constantly in this fight or flight kind of
That's right.
reaction.
Yeah, that's the way I was. And so the
Mhm.
littlest thing would just set my nerves off. Now, just today, I had I got a plane reservation mixed up today, and I thought it was a 9 a.m. flight. I looked at the ticket; it was a 9 p.m. flight. So I was frantically calling the airline. And yes, I did get a bit nervous about that. But if I hadn't been on the antidepressant, I would have been like 10 times more nervous about it. No, fortunately, I have enough miles that I called a 1K number, and I managed to get the flight changed. But I just panicked this morning, looked at the ticket, and I go, wait a minute, that's 9 o'clock at night.
Some of the stuff
Traveling.
I was noticing with just with autistic children that you noticed is the spinning and the way your brain sees. And if I was wondering if it caused you some kind of calm to spin because you didn't see patterns and everything during that time.
Well, I loved watching. I used to wind up the swing chains and then let it unwind and swing. And I liked the way everything spun around. I liked that sensation. And then I can remember as a young child spinning a little brass plate that covered up a bolt that held the bed frame together. And I would just spin it in all different kinds of ways. And a certain amount of that calms you down. But the problem is if a child does that for 5 or 6 hours a day, they're totally blocking out the world. But I was allowed to have an hour after lunch where I could just do stimming.
Do we have fidget spinners today as a result of that?
Oh, that's
Mhm.
right. I mean, basically what I did with the brass plate was the same as a fidget spinner.
I
I think
feel like there's a
self-soothing.
correlation between all the fidget spinners and the little trinket things that they sell with the rise of autism in society
Well, and
now.
the thing is, other people use those fidget spinners. I think a lot of the autism is increased detection, because I can think of people I've worked with that were doing metal fabrication and inventing mechanical equipment that were autistic. I can think of computer people I've worked with that I think definitely were undiagnosed autistic. I think a lot of them were there. I have grandparents come up to me all the time, and they tell me that they find out they're autistic when the kids get diagnosed. But that grandfather or grandmother has a good job, because when they were a young kid, they learned work skills. And one of the big problems we got today is kids are not learning enough work skills.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big problem today.
So with work skills comes the need for communication skills and different communication styles. So you were mentioning earlier how there's this inhibition about having like a filter in a conversation, not having to say immediately every thought that comes to mind or expressing every feeling. And we kind of figure that out when we've got, 8 to 9 people in a Zoom room, figuring out the motion of the symphony of the sounds and getting into a synchronized rhythm in sort of a group way and playing together. So I'd have to ask you about Zoom becoming a dominant platform with education in 2020, a lot of this remote learning and conferencing, and how that differs from face-to-face interaction. And is it different? Is it better? What are the challenges to that?
Well, I think there's one thing that Zoom has done is I've been able to talk to people in other countries where I couldn't possibly go there. That's been good.
Mm-hmm.
But I was grounded for a year. I remember the March 20th, right around their faculty meeting.
Yeah.
We were called in and they closed down the university, and we had 10 days to get our classes online. I'll never forget that faculty meeting. That
Wow.
was pretty terrible. And but the thing that I realized when I went back to some live conferences and things is there's an interaction you get at a live conference you don't get on Zoom. But then the good thing that's happening is it forced me to learn how to use Zoom. So that's why I'm doing this now, because I can't possibly go every place. But there's an interaction and things that you get in live stuff that you don't get on Zoom. And a lot of businesses want to get their people back in the office, and I can fully understand that. So what's going to end up happening is, okay, be in the office 3 days a week. But I'm finding myself that when I go into the office at school, that's when I'm, run into another professor and we collaborate on something. When that would not have happened on Zoom. And so unless you're doing a job like making plane reservations or something like that, where you're just doing it for extra money, but if you kind of want to be involved in something more than doing just okay, like I talked to a lady today to fix this messed up flight, and that's all that person does, and they're just doing it, bringing money. Okay, the collaboration in the office probably doesn't matter, but if you're doing something where like research, I think it's important to get into the office once in a while. And I've sure felt that after COVID calmed down and I could get back out and go to some live conferences.
Yeah, you were talking about the trades in the schools. We have a trade high school here that I taught at for 2 years doing, we had a rock band program, and we had a nursing program, we had a veterinary program, we had
And what did you teach?
vocals for a rock band program. But we had a shop at that school, and it was great. But COVID killed a lot of that for a long
some
time.
schools are putting it back, but then our school's putting it back. And then I was just at a VOTEC conference just recently, within the last 6 months. A special education teacher came up to me and said, well, the insurance regulations are making it so special ed kids can't take shop. this is crazy, because people built my equipment that owned big shops that definitely would be labeled autistic today when they were kids.
Sure.
And this is something, I mean, educators just don't get that.
Right. And if you're in a Zoom room, you can't ride a horse if the horse
Well,
is
no,
on the other end of
no,
a
you
Zoom
can't.
call.
That's the thing. And we've got to get these kids out doing things. I'm seeing too many kids too overprotected. They've never gone shopping by themselves.
Yeah.
I was just writing an article up today on getting autistic kids to understand money. And the way I understood money was based on what you could buy with different amounts of money.
That's like holding cash in your hand and visualizing it.
Well, and then it's sort of like, well, it was 50 cents, 2 quarters in my hand when I was in the 50s.
Sure.
And that was equal to 5 Superman comics. But if I wanted a 69-cent airplane, I had to save for 2 weeks. I was learning that at a very young age. And I have to relate different kind of like classifications, amounts of money to different things. $5 a day might be a small McDonald's meal. $100 might buy me a shirt, pants, and maybe something else at Walmart.
Sure.
That's bigger than a meal at McDonald's.
So
I've heard you give a lot of credit to your mother
Oh,
for
absolutely.
bringing out all these traits, teaching you these things. Now, those of us that have loved ones or family that are autistic or even undiagnosed autistic, or even don't, how do you feel like it was a communication that your mother had, just this relentless communication with you? Or how do you feel like you were able to?
One of the things that also helped, 50s upbringing also helped. Social rules were taught in a much more structured way in the 50s. You had sit-down meals. We were taught to take turns talking. Okay, let's say I took my drink and I stirred it with my finger. That's kind of rude. Mother didn't say no. She said, use the spoon. Now, if I went over to the neighbor's house and I stuck my finger in the mashed potatoes, Mrs. Wood would say, use the fork. Grown-ups corrected little kids in the 50s. That was just the way it was. And it was not done in a mean way or anything. They wouldn't scream at you. I remember going in the store and touching too many things. And the staff said, only touch the things you're going to buy. They didn't scream at me. They told me what I should do. That was very typical 50s upbringing.
So a lot of what you're describing sounds like, and let me know if you're familiar with Madame Montessori's.
Yes, I'm familiar with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Would you say that that's a better direction that schools should take since it's more involved?
Well, I think that, my school, when I was growing up, had lots of hands-on things. I was taught sewing, woodworking, and art. My favorite thing in 4th grade was a Singer Sew Handy sewing machine. You had a little crank. It actually sewed. I made costumes for the school play on it. Kids are not doing those sort of things today. I'm seeing kids growing up, they've never used a tool. I have a book on calling all minds. It's about my kids' projects, because we've got kids today that don't do stuff like make paper snowflakes. When I did a book signing for this 5 years ago, I was horrified to find out that about 20 to 30% of elementary school kids in a suburb of Denver had never made a paper airplane.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
What do you think of the idea of getting children at a very young age? I had a friend whose son was autistic. He may have been about 3.
Yeah, that's when we need to start some early intervention.
Yeah, that is actually when they started handing him a tablet. And they said, oh, he just loves this tablet and he can do all these things. And,
oh, well, they need to be doing some other things, interacting with people. I'm concerned about all the electronics. The other thing I'm concerned about, because I've been in the livestock field for 50 years and the autism field for about 40 years, is I don't know what's happening with the very young children. COVID shut down a lot of the in-person autism meetings. And I'm finding now, as I talk around on various things, the youngest kid that, when parents come to me, is about 10 years old. What are the 3-year-olds doing? Because the research is very clear, early intervention, and that means a lot of interaction back and forth with an adult. The turn-taking games were a very important part. Like, you take a toy car, with a 3-year-old and you take turns rolling it around and pretending to go places in it.
Yeah, I have cerebral palsy, and growing up, that my school, we had so many different kids with so many different conditions, whether it was like me with cerebral palsy or someone with autism, and we had so many variations of conditions, and the staff in my small town wasn't equipped to handle all of us, maybe 1 or 2 types of conditions. So a lot of times what they would do is they would just stick us all in one room and just have a person kind of babysit us as we play with toys or something.
Well, that's
Or
not
they would,
okay. Yeah, that's not.
or they would excuse us from things they might be difficult for us instead of trying to have us figure it out. Like
Well, when I was in when I was in elementary school, there was a girl with a heart condition. And now that heart condition would be correctable with surgery, but it wasn't correctable in the 50s. And she was always goalie in soccer. She couldn't run, but she was included in everything. And unfortunately, she died when she was about 12. And she was always dark blue all the time, but she was included. And we just make her goalie.
We were talking about interaction with other humans.
In a soccer game, make her goalie. But she was always included. You know, she wasn't like put in a room by herself. And I remember when we went to party at an amusement park, I was paired with her, and she could only go on the really gentle rides, but she participated. I was in a small school that had about 12 kids in a class, and that's what we did with Claudia.
That sounds much more human than to bubble somebody, you know, and try to protect them and make sure that, you know, treat them as if they're so fragile that they don't really get to experience life.
Well, the thing that she couldn't absolutely not do, she could not run.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as running wasn't involved, she participated.
Mm.
I mean, she was in art class, all of those kinds of things.
Temple,
School play, she was in that.
I want to ask you.
Her limitation was she could not run. She could not do hard physical exertion because she had a hole in her heart, which today is correctable with surgery, but in the 50s was not correctable with surgery.
In the school systems now, we have these, all the textbooks are online. All the reference material is online. We don't have actual books. All of our students have Chromebooks that are issued to them either by the time they're in elementary or high school at the very minimum. And they have very little hands-on things other than their tablets, their computers, or their phone. And I think that's kind of separating, like we're talking about. You're talking about putting kids' hands on out there with animals, doing the work, you know, getting them a wrench in their hand to actually do the thing. That was one of the things that I felt like the advances I had with the students that I had when we just would give them an instrument, just stick it in their hands and let them play, and just let them figure it out the way they learned best. Get them on stage to perform a little bit, get a little road under their tires, and then have them see if they love it or not. If that's the thing they love, then I saw that some of these autistic kids just take up a bass and just become these amazing players on their own, just because we gave it to them and made the opportunity.
You got exposed kids. I'm sorry for interrupting. This is one I have a difficult time timing.
Me too.
Of timing when to break into conversations. But I'm a big believer in exposing kids to lots of different things. I was exposed to a little flute. I could never figure out how to play it. But another kid's going to pick it up and just play it. I was exposed to all kinds of art stuff. I had an embroidery class, which I really liked. If you expose kids to lots of different things, you can see what they gravitate towards. I talked to a mom just last night that had an 8-year-old very good at math, and I suggested finding some old algebra books that I would use as a doorstop, and expose these kids to these old algebra books and see if it takes off on them. You see, you don't know unless you expose them to different things. And then I suggested things like Khan Academy, and that is online, but that's free math classes. And she hadn't thought to do that. See, sometimes people get so much into the autism diagnosis, they don't think about things this kid could do. And you had the kid that, really got to play in the bass. That's wonderful.
So
Temple, oh, go ahead, Rachel.
Sorry. I wanted to know about your thoughts on being exposed to nature. The way that we were describing and talking about spinning is kind of how I feel sitting next to a river. When I sit next to
Okay.
that, it feels
For some kids, that's really good. And some kids doing therapeutic riding, that's been really good. There was a study done on therapeutic riding, but one of the control conditions was going out in a beautiful garden. And that was definitely better than a wait list control. So, getting kids out in nature. There's programs where they do things like get autistic kids to go out and go on boats. And one of the things that these programs do is show the parents their kid actually can do stuff.
So sometimes it's more parents than it is.
Say things like, "Oh, you got him on a boat? I can't believe that. Yeah, we got him on a boat and he liked it." It was a surfing. They get them on surfboards, and the parents are amazed that their kid could do some surfing.
One of the things I did to prepare for today was to listen to an interview you did with Jordan Peterson, and you made a good point there about people who are protesting that you saw a problem with the animal processing industry, and so you went very specific about how you would approach solving that problem.
Yeah, and the other thing is, I didn't just too many people say, "Well, people treat animals awful." I picked out something specific to work on. That's one of the reasons why it was effective. It wasn't a broad concept. It was something specific, which makes it a lot more fixable.
Right. And I was going to say that might also work in the affirmative instead of just seeing a problem and being specific about solving it. But you got me thinking here with COVID kind of mashed down a lot of the in-person activities that all of us participate in. And so then people who are in subcategories are going to suffer even more. And so if we're trying to bring those back or reintroduce them, things like hands-on with instruments, with tools, with art, etc.
Yeah.
It might be better if we have that desire. Like me and Gordy both have worked with kids with instruments. I had a very almost identical job to what he described. We had a whole rock and roll setup in the basement of a teen center.
Good.
And being able to set kids at a drum set or a keyboard or in front of a microphone made all the difference. So maybe if we were all to choose specific things that might help, and even choose specific categories of people, that might be a more effective solution than just seeing the broad problem and wondering.
The thing is that this gets into different kinds of thinking, and I talk about this in my visual thinking book. I'm an object visualizer, so that helped me with animals and mechanical things. Another person may be a mathematician and a musician. Those kind of go together. But verbal thinkers, thinking words, tend to think in broad concepts, an inclusive classroom. Well, what do you do to make a classroom inclusive? One of the things is get rid of the LED lights that flicker. Now, that doesn't bother everybody with autism, but it bothers some. And I'll tell you how to find them. Photograph the room in slow motion video. Play it back in slow motion video. But that bothers, I'd say, 10 or 20% of people on the spectrum. Okay, so inclusive classroom, getting rid of that.
I wonder if that's harmful for people to have a flicker that's so fast that we can't see it with our naked eye. Do you think that could influence?
I think for a lot of people, it doesn't bother them. But there is a subgroup of people where it's definitely a problem. And I had a student years ago that had that problem with fluorescent lighting, flickering. Those are mostly phased out now. And she would just get kind of spaced out. She just couldn't think. until she got outside and got away from the lights, those lights. There were certain classrooms where she just couldn't think when she was in those classrooms. And also people with head injuries also sometimes have this problem. And the thing is, it doesn't seem to have much to do with the cost of the lighting. And then there are things with dimmer switches. Also, some flat screen TVs flicker, others don't. Tablets, for the most part, don't flicker. But okay, that's again something you can work on. Helping kids to tolerate loud noise like vacuum cleaners. Let the child turn the vacuum cleaner on and off. I just talked to a family the other day. Their kid was terrified of the leaf blower. And then they let the kid operate the leaf blower, where they turned it on and off, and they thought that was the most funnest thing there ever was. Okay, but again, that's a simple, specific thing where the child controls the noisy thing. Okay, the lighting thing and that, those are two specific things that people can go and do. And a big thing that can save a lot of jobs is pilots' checklists. Because if somebody just goes, yak, 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 get this how you close down Walmart's cash register, I'm not going to remember that unless I write down the steps. There's lots of jobs that be saved with pilots' checklists.
Would you consider that to be a routine? Are there certain people that need to have a routine to follow?
Well, the thing is,
Sure.
I cannot remember long strings of sequential verbal instructions. I have to write down the steps. And I would have to do that now. And so another example I gave is, let's say I was going to become a gate agent at the airport. There's like 10 things I got to do on the computer. Like, we'll just talk about the computer part. Gate check a bag. Now, if somebody just goes boom, 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 okay, tag the bag. I'm going to have a very hard time remembering those keystrokes. Print a boarding pass, boom, boom, boom. I would have to write that down and then take it home and practice it. And probably make up jingles for the different things I had to do on those keystrokes. That's something I would have to do now. But then there's things I'm going to be good at. Denver Airport frozen jet bridges, I'll make that problem go away. They can delay flights for over an hour.
With the leaf blower and letting the kid turn it on and off, do you think that was similar to you not wanting a human hug versus a mechanical hug?
Yes, yes, because I controlled the squeeze machine.
Okay.
Exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing.
And do you think any part of that squeeze machine and your invention on that added to later on dogs with that thunder hug shirt?
Oh yeah, that I'm listed on the patents for the dog
Nice.
thunder pressure wraps. For the thunder shirt, I'm listed in the patent for the thunder shirt.
That's how I first learned about you, Temple, was that squeeze machine, because in the process of learning wheelchair seating and positioning for people who need special seating and positioning because of disabilities, in my studies, your machine came up and I was just flabbergasted at what a wonderful idea it was, and to lay them inside there and let them have control of the button.
They have control of it. That's the thing.
Yeah.
I talked to somebody the other day and they got the kid over being afraid of getting his blood pressure tested by letting the kid pump it up. Again, you see that's control. And with headphones, I'm seeing a lot of kids getting wearing them all the time. It makes the hearing more sensitive. The kid can have the headphone with them all the time. Have it with you. Try not to wear it, but that's control. See, that's the key, is controlling a lot of these things. See, now these are simple, specific things that can be very helpful. It's not just talking about an inclusive classroom. Now, that's not
Right.
everything you would need for an inclusive classroom, but fixing that lighting, that's going to, for certain kids, that's going to help a whole lot.
And you're talking about introducing problems for very specific problems.
That's right.
Like I found a weighted blanket helped me a lot,
Yeah,
with,
okay. That's a
sleep.
simple thing to do.
and which is kind of similar to the hug machine, kind of
That's right.
the
That's-
sensory thing. And you're talking about addressing one little thing at a time, like
That's right.
just that one thing, like introducing the weighted blanket
That's
to help
right.
your sleep, and it adds on to another thing and another thing, correct?
Well, that's right. And you know, I want to try to help things out. I'm also concerned where, as I'm doing a lot of talks, I don't know where the real parents of the young, really young autistic kids are getting their information from. I'm not having enough parents of 3-year-olds coming to meetings. And
Well,
the COVID was bad because that knocked out all the in-person meetings, and then they're gradually coming back. But the parents of 3-year-olds are not showing up at these meetings where before they did.
it's almost like this, the schools are almost hindering the information process, because it's like it's keeping them away from connecting to actual parents, because everybody wants to do these Zoom things, and nobody wants to go out and see people face to face, and even the parents don't. And so the kids don't, of course.
Well, yeah, and I just read an article yesterday in the New York Times that nobody was in the Wall Street Journal, that COVID there's more cases of speech delay.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Because the kids were not getting enough interaction with other kids. That's not good. Now we've got to get them out doing things with other kids. You know, if they've got they need to get off of the electronics and do stuff. And the other thing I'm seeing is they're not learning any working skills. The amount of teenagers I'm talking to, parents and 10-year-olds that have never gone shopping, I think it's just bad. Things that I was doing when I was 10 years old. I went shopping all the time. And I learned to save money to buy little things I wanted.
Well, I wanted to tell you, it's an honor to talk to you, because you're something of a hero, apparently, in my family. Because once I told some of my family members I was going to talk to you, they're like, oh my God, you're talking to Temple Grandin? Oh, cool. Because I mean, I have a family of educators that your books have really helped my sister a lot. And she deals with autistic kids, and what she does, she has a farm, a ranch up in Montana, and my family comes from a ranching family. And so understanding your story and watching the movie explain how that all came about was really powerful, I think, to a lot of people. So, and especially showing at the end where the parents are really trying to connect with their kids, and you were showing you at that conference actually speaking eloquently so these parents understand the potential of the spectrums of that you can go from where you started and have successes because you were, I don't know, steered in the right direction, I guess. Is that what you would call it? Or
well, I was
would you
very
call it
lucky
good
to
communication?
get very good early intervention, but also I was out playing with the neighborhood kids. And what's happening now is I think a lot of these kids are just getting stuck on electronics.
Right.
And I'm not seeing good outcomes like getting jobs. You know, that grandfather that I would talk to would have had a paper route at age 11. So I suggest to parents, well, maybe 11-year-olds do a church volunteer job, farmer's market volunteer at the old folks home. They need to be doing something where somebody outside the family is the boss. That's a very different skill than working with family. Like I talked to a parent the other day and they said, well, my kid's helping in the office of the business I own. It's a fairly big business. I said, put them on another floor of the building. I don't care if you own the business, and have somebody else be the boss away from your office. They've got to start learning that skill.
Do you think some of it has to do with drive and desire in terms of what people want to do? I feel like there's a big emphasis on doing the thing that you really, really want to do. Like, how did you decide on cows? Like, why not chickens? Why not, anything? Like,
I was exposed to cows as a teenager.
Mhm.
I came from a non-ag background. The cattle thing started as a teenager. That's where it's so important for kids to get exposed to a whole lot of different things.
So just the exposure would be, I would think that just the exposure would be enough to spark some insight into something you want to do.
Well, I got exposed to woodworking as a young child, art as a young child. I got exposed to musical instruments, and I was not very good at that. Where another kid takes off on musical instruments. but you don't know unless they're exposed. I had a flute, I never could figure out how to play it.
Yeah, I can't seem to nail down the piano.
I could never figure out how to finger it.
Did having a blind friend, being a visual thinker, did having a blind friend give you a vocabulary and like an inspiration to
Well,
give?
she was very, very skilled with the cane. And if she dropped her cane and couldn't find it, she'd panic. And she was totally skilled. Like when she got next semester's classes, somebody would lead her sighted guide just once to the buildings for the classes. And she'd feel the ground with that cane and she would know where to go.
Hmm.
That's
That's
pretty
interesting.
fantastic.
Was she a visual thinker as well? I guess.
She was a visual thinker of touch.
Touch.
Like she'd feel the ground with the cane, and somebody would do sighted guide with her once when she got her new classes each semester to show her, like, take her around all the buildings. Then once she'd done that, she could walk to all our classes by herself. She had to be shown sighted guide once. And she'd feel the ground with her cane. She was an absolute cane master. She was blind from birth.
I can't even imagine that.
Well, that's what she did.
Building that map with touch only.
Well, that's what she did.
And probably
I heard that she went on an airplane and she panicked because they put her cane up in the overhead bin. And then I helped her. I suggested she get a cane that folds up. Then she could have that in her purse or hold it in her hand on the plane. And then another thing we did is I said, we were Star Trek fans, and Monday Night Football competed with Star Trek. And so I said, there's got to be a radio you can get that will bring in TV stations. So she got a radio, and we'd call it Watching Star Trek on the radio. Well, a bunch of times we did that. And it works pretty good, just audio.
That's the theater of the mind aspect of thing.
Well, because I know what the sets look like. And so Star Trek was a pretty good show on the radio, especially if you already knew what the sets looked like.
The sound design with the bleeping and the technological sounds, or like water flowing, so you know you're outside.
And things like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Temple, you were talking about being a visual thinker. I recently saw a study that was saying that the amount of visual thinkers is lower now, and more people that are more maybe word descriptive based thinkers is more predominant in more recent years than prior years.
Well, visual thinkers really excel at things like shop. So if you take out the shop classes, many visual thinkers are playing video games in the basement when they should be out inventing mechanical devices. There's a connection here. Because I worked with plenty of visual thinkers that owned their shops.
Sure. That's a great question about the life of the inner life, the thoughts that people are thinking, and how different minds will think differently. What Chris is talking about in terms of people who can visualize and see an apple in their mind, to see what the apple looks like spinning around their mind, and know this is the top of the apple, this is the apple, and like actually see it without having it in their visual.
Well, and I can see it, and the apple rolled around a bit too much on the conveyor at the supermarket, and one of them had a bruise.
Sure.
That's the one I ate the next day because I have to go out of town for a week, and that's the apple that's going to rot.
Right. And then maybe
get eaten first.
Maybe a corollary to that sort of thinking is this idea of having an inner monologue, where you might have what people would consider different voices or different personalities in your mind. It might be portrayed in the old cartoons as an angel on one shoulder, a devil on another. It could just be like considering the choices and then having the monologue of, if I do this, then this might happen. And then another personality or a trait, a quality of your mind might have a dialogue to answer that question. And now there are certain people I've heard, I have an inner monologue, so I don't know what it's like to not have an inner monologue. I'm told that today there are people who are experiencing the world without an inner monologue, And then they think that people with inner monologues are crazy or schizophrenic or something because they're different.
Well, I would sometimes when I was drawing, I would say, now if I just take the concrete form and I put it here, we take the post hole digger in this, and I got to put 2 pieces of rebar on this post to hold it in the center of the hole. Okay, now as I'm saying that, I'm seeing it. And I would do some talking to myself, thinking out loud. I don't do that so much now, but I would do it when I was drawing, but I always did it in private.
And that's
That
a
makes
skill
me
you
wonder-
learned? Did adults
Well, I
direct
found
you
that
to
when I
not?
talked out loud,
Yeah,
especially when I was in high school, it
right.
sort of helped me to organize my thoughts,
Sure.
talking out loud. I learned to read out loud. I didn't read until I was 8 years old.
That's
Mother
another good question.
phonics.
Reading out loud to yourself versus learning to read in your mind. And then even some people, when they learn to read, they will still move their mouth and their tongue
Well,
to
that's
vocalize it.
me. I had to read. It took me a while to get rid of reading out loud, but I don't think I would have learned to read if Mother hadn't taught me out loud, sounding out my words with phonics. That's how I learned. And I very quickly went from no reading at age 8 up to 6th grade level of reading.
That's the best way to learn how to read. I worked for a school curriculum that was literature based, and that's exactly what every single grade up through high school did. You read out loud to each other. The children.
That's exactly what we did in my school. And
Yeah.
but it took me a while to learn to read silently, and I would wiggle my mouth around for a while, and I eventually got to where I could stop doing that.
Now,
So,
Temple, I was surprised. Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, so I read somewhere recently that in the last 25 years, the number of children 8 years old, it's doubled. It used to be like 1 in 54, and now it's 2 or 3 in 54.
You're
Is
talking about autism or about reading?
of autism.
Well, and I
Uh,
think a lot of it's increased detection, because I can think about all these people I worked with. I remember an electrician guy, one of the plants I worked with all through the 80s, had a small shop, kind of did his own thing, and he was on the spectrum. We got along just great.
Do you think that there were throughout history, like
Oh, I think they've been there. Michelangelo, I think, was autistic. He was a grubby little 12-year-old that dropped out of school, running around churches looking at great art, and he grew up with stone cutting tools. That starts with exposure. Then he made some stuff and he got put into a shop as an apprentice. And, this is where exposure, then mentoring. Really, really, really important.
yeah.
And I want to help the younger kids. And I'm concerned about these 3-year-olds not seeing at these meetings. And when I've been going to live meetings, and I'm seeing a lot of the parents of very young children not showing up at these meetings.
Now, the reason this is important is so that the parents understand how to deal with these children, right? And
Well,
how
that's
to
right. Just
communicate
letting them
with
play with
them.
an iPad all day is not the thing to do.
Exactly. Thank you.
My TV watching was strictly limited. It was an hour a
So-
day.
Hi,
Yeah.
I'm Benjamin. I came in late. I apologize for that. I was across the state this morning. I would like to know if you had any thoughts on dairy cows. A lot of times when you're milking, they can really make it sometimes tough and sometimes hold back their cream, do some other odd things. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts on like maybe what they're seeing while they're being milked.
Well,
you know,
they also pick up on the personality of the milker. There's an old study done by a scientist named Seabrook, and he said the confident introvert really got along well with the dairy cows, and they pick up if the person's nervous. Sometimes the udder might be sore. That would could make a dairy cow hard to milk. Also changes in routine. Some of the cows that have the worst problems with changes in routine are the ones that almost lead to sheltered life. One person milking them, then a child comes in the milking parlor and the cow's freaking out. But let's say you have a barn where kids play in the parlor and lots of people come in there all the time, then they're used to that and it's fine. And there's a lot of dogs that lead such a sheltered life. They're afraid of everything. Problems of being afraid of the vet has gotten worse. And I think it's because the dogs are strict leash laws. The dogs don't get out to meet other dogs, do dog social stuff and meet enough strange people.
You think your research in the slaughterhouse helped for everything that's positive reinforcement with training animals now?
Well, the thing I looked at is they're not afraid of getting slaughtered, but they're terrified of reflections on metal, things like that. And then you get rid of the reflections, they walk right in there. There was a big shadow that appeared at one of the plants last year. I called it Spider Monster. Looked like a big wagon wheel shaped shadow in the middle of the handling facility. Oh, they wouldn't walk over that. That showed up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was not there in the morning. Well, out there in the afternoon, the handling was all messed up, and I took one look at that shadow that was cast by an overhead structure, and I go, that's your problem. The Spider Monster.
I like, where did you come up with the animal, we're going to kill it to eat it, but it deserves to be honored up until that point?
Well, and if you do things right, they walk into the slaughterhouse the same as they do in the veterinary chute. And that's something I had to figure out. Really, I used to go back and forth between a feed yard and a slaughter plant, see if they behaved the same way in both places. They behaved better at the slaughter plant because they had better handling than the feed yards had. But they're afraid of stuff that if the chute's too dark, they can see moving, see people up ahead, see a lot of motion up ahead. They're afraid of that.
You talked about airports and these sort of cattle lines, and I'm thinking like there's similarities between cattle being lined up in a queue and humans going through in airport security. Have you thought about maybe improvements to airport security to make certain young folks who are already afraid of a lot of things to go through and have a body scan or to be felt?
All right, let's talk about
security?
one of the things that's really scary for a lot of autistic people is surprises.
Okay.
So let's talk about the airport. The first thing would be looking at lots of videos about what they do in security. And one of the things a kid has to be warned about is the guards may touch you. That needs to not be a surprise. Surprises scare. And the other thing is anything you could do to make something interesting. Okay, we're going to go on a plane and we're going to go up above the clouds. I'm sure you can find pictures online of what it looks like above the clouds from an airplane. Start to make that interesting. But you don't want to have a big surprise. Some airports actually will let you come in and do practice, you know, checking in, going through security, sit out at a gate. The TSA in some airports will let families with autistic kids practice going through security. So it's not a surprise. You know, it could make it interesting. You can see inside your bag. That's pretty cool, actually. But surprises scare. You know, if you're going to be going to a new school, it'd be a really good idea to visit it if possible. If that's not possible, at least go to the web page, get on Zoom calls with some of the teachers. Anything you can do to reduce the surprise factor, and things you can do to increase the interest factor.
Well, to piggyback off of Cheney's question, and this may tie into Alan's airport question, what is it that made cows' lives valuable enough for this type of attention?
Made what valuable enough?
Valuable enough for this much time and attention and effort, you know, worthy of the respect of
cows' lives.
Cows' lives
Was the
well, cows feel pain. In fact, even back in the 1950s, when the Humane Slaughter Act was first passed, that got more letters to Congress than just about anything else. Back in the 50s. You know, people are concerned about that kind of stuff.
My wife was wondering if you had any specific recommendations for a cow that's calving and making them comfortable and feeling good.
Well, you see, you have some heifers that have never seen another cow calve, so then she doesn't know what it is. That can make it more stressful. You want to make sure if it's a first calf heifer, they use an easy calving bull. That's an important thing to do. Have a cattle like to kind of hide and give them kind of a secluded, clean place to calve. This is when I would not have tons of people around unless she needs help. But the cattle, when they calve out in the pasture, they tend to go off kind of a secluded area to have their calf. If you're interested,
Yeah, mine,
in cattle, I've got
I've,
this book right here on cattle behavior during handling, Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals.
I will have to order that. And yeah, mine, I live out in the mountains and mine like to meander over to the neighbors' houses, and I end up having to wander all over the mountain trying to find them when they calf.
So
She's
then
asking about
well,
this.
they like to find a secluded place to calve. That's
Yeah.
something that they tend to do.
Temple, I have a question about your being an author. I want to add a prolific author. I glanced here and there's 2 pages of books written by you. And I was just curious, the first question I had was how do you actually go about your authorship process? Because a lot of people imagine that you have to actually write at a computer or write with a pen and pad. And in my experience with some of my own writing, I start by recording it and then using a computer to transcribe it or things. You know, I've given myself a lot looser guidelines as to what means I'm writing something as opposed to writing it by hand. And with so many books, and I did see also that you had worked alongside of a lady. I lost her name here now.
Well, I've got co-authors on some of those books, and then I've got some like Thinking in Pictures. This book right here, my original autobiography 26 years ago, that did not have a co-author. And what I did there is I hand wrote each chapter, and then I had somebody type them for me. They didn't write them, they just typed them. And then on this book, my visual thinking book, I wrote the initial drafts, and then Betsy, my co-author, was very, very verbal. You know, she'd smooth out a lot of my kind of associative, rough language. And then my very first book, Emergence Labeled Autistic, I was doing some autism conferences, and I had a publisher approach me. You know, this is where contacts can really help you get started.
Right, networking with people.
Networking is just so important. Absolutely so important.
Yeah, thank you. Because there's a lot of people that imagine that they would like to do things. And I know oftentimes I fall into the process of feeling overwhelmed, imagining arriving at the final outcome. But it's the same as you said about other things, as just, it's okay to just get specific with a project and with a task, and then allow things to emerge that way and not be overwhelmed by, like, I'm sure if you had
Well,
imagined.
you kind of go step by step. I have to say this morning, I was rather upset when I looked at the plane ticket and it was 9 p.m. instead of 9 in the morning. And then I'm madly looking around for the special 1K number to call the airline because the travel agency is closed. But I did something about it. See, another problem I'm seeing is that a lot of people on the spectrum at college and at school, especially at college, when they're having problems with a course, they don't ask for help quickly enough. When I failed my first math quiz, I asked for help and I got tutoring right away. It wasn't called advocating for yourself back then. It was called get tutoring before I failed the course. And that's what I did.
Right.
And a lot of those jobs AI is going to replace. And skilled trades, a lot of the hands-on things, AI is not going to replace that. But ChatGPT is quite the creative writer. I played with it a little bit. I asked it to write a short paragraph about purple flying zebras.
That's the idea of soul in art. One of the questions you were asking when Claire Danes was portraying you in this movie we watched together, the question of where did the cow go? Where did it go? It was there, and now it's meat. And that's the question of the soul and maybe the afterlife and more of extended consciousness realm, and then maybe thinking in pictures with ideas that might be considered paranormal or supernatural. Well, what kind of thoughts do you have about that?
Well, you see my Hubble Space Telescope picture there in the background.
Yes.
Single most important picture that the Hubble took, and then the James Webb's been taking more really cool pictures, is the deep space field. And when you look at the deep space field, it has hundreds and hundreds of galaxies, not stars, galaxies.
Mm-hmm.
And when I looked at that, well, you got to think about life's great questions. I look at the Hubble deep space field. Now, the thing that's interesting about that is the scientist who did that had a proposal that everybody thought was crazy. He was going to waste 10 days of precious Hubble observing time pointing a telescope right near the Big Dipper where there was blank space with nothing. He pointed it at nothing and found everything. And all the other researchers thought it was stupid.
Mhm.
He did it. He hit the jackpot.
See, that's that open thinking that I really appreciate about you. And I've heard you talk about explaining to parents, like getting out of the medical system and getting out of the educational system, or just out of that mindset.
Oh, we got to get out of it. We got to break up some medical model. They get too trapped into the words. And I think it's a very big problem. Autism is a part and part of who I am. I wouldn't want to change. But having an interesting career is what's given my life meaning. And right now, when I've had parents come up to me, like a lady came up to me this morning in my car and said that I really helped her out. Okay, I'm now in my mid-70s. I'm way past retirement age, even though I'm still working. I'm going to be going to a livestock training tomorrow. I'm an instructor for meatpacking plant animal welfare. And so it was really important. I was panicking about that ticket. But when people come to me and says, well, my kid got a job and bought a house and got married because of your book, that makes me happy.
Mhm.
And I think you can get too much just getting locked into the whole autism thing. And then you think about someone like Steve Jobs probably was autistic, and he invented the iPhone. He was an artist. That's why the interface is easy to use. Mathematicians had to make the phone work. That's why you need both kinds of minds.
You're here.
Think about all the people. I mean, it seems to be a trend online to self-diagnose
Mhm.
that they're autistic.
Well, they're probably pretty accurate. Autism diagnosis is a behavioral profile. It's not like having tuberculosis. So, well, we did a lab test on you, you got tuberculosis, or you've got cancer. It's not a definitive diagnosis in the same way. Also, it's a true continuous trait when the slightly nerdy become autism.
Mhm.
And getting into satisfying career is something that's made my life worthwhile. And right now I want to see the kids who think differently get into something to be successful. Because some of the most fun stuff I ever did was figuring out how to build things. Also some of the most stressful stuff, because you got a plant manager breathing down your neck. Are you going to get the thing to work?
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we know you said you have to go, and we
Yeah.
appreciate your time very much. A lot of people are going to watch this afterwards because we're going to. Jim was the one that took the big risk and reach out, and I want to thank you, Jim, for inviting Temple on so we could all talk. But we're going to rebroadcast this for our main audience, and so we're just going to encourage people to look you up, to buy your books. I'm definitely going to buy a few books myself.
Yeah,
And,
and this is the book that talks about the different kinds of thinking. My newest book. I just want to give you permission. My name's Temple Grandin, and I give you permission to record this and distribute it.
Awesome.
Now you've got your legal release.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Maybe
Yes.
we'll call you back sometime
Well, it's an
after
honor
we
to
get
meet.
results.
And who is your main audience?
It's a pretty
That's a
broad
good
audience.
question.
Well, we deal with a
Weirdos,
lot
unusual
of
people.
esoteric and conspiracy type topics. So we got people that like the strange fringe edge information, but I would say the people that have an open mind in those areas. So everything from cryptids and Bigfoot to UFOs to other conspiracies to magic. That's I would you correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, but that seems like the audience that we have.
Well, and I want to see the kids that, you know, the people that helped me a lot were the people that were different. I remember when I was at Franklin Pierce College, the dean's wife, I'm pretty sure she was on the spectrum. She was very helpful. I had friends in a school club, and the head of the club, I'm pretty sure, was on the spectrum. Those were the, you know, the people that often helped me. There were other people that were definitely not autistic too that helped me. I had a lot of good mentors, both non-autistic and some that were autistic. The dean's wife, when I was in college, definitely was autistic, and I'd go over to her house when I got lonely, and she was very, very helpful. I'm almost positive she was on the spectrum.
Do you have a favorite Star Trek captain?
Well, I like Mr. I always liked Mr. Spock. He was
Awesome.
logical. I related to Mr. Spock.
Yes.
And I was a really big classic Trek fan. And Gloria, my blind roommate, we used to call it watching Star Trek on the radio, because there was one TV in our dorm. It was in the 70s, and it was on Monday Night Football. So we weren't going to watch Star Trek on that television.
Right.
Yeah.
So we
Temple
listened to
Grandin.
Star Trek every week on the radio. And I was the one that helped her get the radio that would pull in the TV stations. And also I helped her get a folding cane that she didn't have to put in the overhead compartment, because that was very scary for her. Because when she didn't have that cane, it was like losing a sense organ. That was like her eyes.
I wouldn't want to put my eyes in the overhead compartment.
I wouldn't either. And she said she really panicked on when she went on. She didn't fly very much. Went on a flight, and her cane was put in the overhead compartment, and that was very scary for her.
Well, Temple, you have really benefited a lot of people with your work in your life. You're really quite an amazing person.
And
Well, I wanna
animals.
help the kids that are different get into satisfying careers where they can make a positive difference. That is something that I'm kind of feel now in my mid-70s. One of the main things I want to do is help the kids that think differently to get out and do positive things, get into careers where they can, you know, use their different ways of thinking and do stuff that's beneficial.
Yeah, that's great. And getting kids into, I think a lot of us have been on this journey of having a close relationship with animals in our groups. A lot of our weirdo friends, you know, animals have been great
Well,
therapy for
here's
us.
I've got books about
Huge for
animals
me.
too. These are my two
Yeah,
books about animals.
exactly.
Animals in
Thank you.
Translation and Animals Make Us Human.
Animals
And
make us
Animals
human.
in Translation, I talk about how being a visual thinker helped me to understand animals.
Mhm.
I have one question about animals. I have goats, and I got these goats. Their mother died when they were born, and so I had triplets, 3 goats. And I
Okay.
bottle fed them, kept them in the house, and kept in my backyard. And my neighbor got mad. He's like, "You can't have livestock next to my house. This isn't a farm." And I said, "These are pets, not livestock." Is there a difference between pets and livestock? Can a
Well,
goat be
livestock
a
are
pet?
what most people would consider farm animals, and goats would be farm animals.
Farm animal.
In our town right here, you're now allowed to keep 6 chickens in your backyard as long, but no roosters because they like to crow.
They are noisy.
Yeah, roosters are noisy. That's the problem. People don't want to get woken up at the crack of dawn by a rooster. And there's other people where they wouldn't have bothered about the goats in their backyard as long as you kept things clean. And
Yeah.
I don't even really hear
Well-
the chickens, but it's funny because the hens make almost as much noise as the roosters. It's
well,
just
I
a
don't know, like
slightly
we finally got it a few years ago where you're allowed to have some hens in the backyard for eggs. Okay, well, it's been really great talking to everybody.
Thank you very
And
much.
I think I'll leave the meeting now, and thank you so much
All
for
right.
having me. I really enjoyed being on your program. And
Thank
I
you.
wanna help the individuals that think differently, and especially the young kids, to get out and get a great life. and find out that things like fixing cars is probably more interesting than video games. I've talked to several young adults who discovered fixing cars. One of them is fixing trains now for the railroad, and they love them. He found out that fixing motors was a lot more interesting than video games. And you'll have a job
Love
for
it.
life fixing things like trains. They're not going away. Or fixing elevators. They're not going away.
Right.
Yeah.
I appreciate that you're doing that, Temple. For me, with having cerebral palsy, it took me a year to find a job that would accept me, because a lot of places didn't want to hire someone that looked like they couldn't do manual labor or couldn't present their company or whatever in a healthy way, physical healthy way. And then I finally got a job at a botanical garden center.
Good.
And so not only did they accept me and found the niche that I could help them with that they
Good.
needed to, but it also helped me reconnect with nature. And so I
Good.
think what you're talking about is we need more people like that to help people with different conditions reconnect.
Well, the other thing I learned to do is, okay, here's one of my drawings, is that when you're weird, one of the things to do is to show off your work. That's how I sold jobs. I showed off drawings. I showed off pictures of my work. I started out before I did the cattle, with a sign painting business. And I'd sell sign painting jobs by showing off photographs of some of my signs. You could show off, portfolios of drawings. You could show off, maybe an old clunker car that you reconditioned and made beautiful. No, it's showing the work off. But you got to show that stuff to the right person. Showing it to just a verbal HR person isn't going to work. Like the person I worked with that had the 1 semester class in CAD drafting, he showed a homework assignment, but it was a homework assignment. He showed it to the engineering people, and they said, "Oh boy, you're good. I'll hire you." Boom. He laid out 3 beef plates. I worked with him 1 semester of computer drafting, no background in it. Very much a visual thinker.
Very cool.
And the final question, where can people find your books? Do you have a preference?
Well, they're on Amazon has got them. They can also go to templegrandin.com. That's my autism website, templegrandin.com. My livestock website is grandin.com. Grandin.com tends to have more of the livestock books on it. Autism books are more on templegrandin.com. All my books are on Amazon. They can be ordered through local bookstores. That's another way you can get them. I'm a big believer in also helping support local bookstores. And just about everything's available in also an ebook, also an audiobook. Most of my things are also available in audiobook, and I'm finding that a lot of people are liking audiobook.
Same. I'm an Audible learner, so I really
Okay, well,
appreciate
they're available in
audiobooks.
Audible. Now, the thing is, something like this where it's kids' projects, and I have another book called The Outdoor Scientist. Yeah, you can get it in Audible, but it doesn't show the diagrams of how to build the projects.
Right, of course.
Right.
I think I'd recommend that, the physical book.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. I appreciate
Thanks for
everything
coming.
you're doing. Thanks for coming. Thanks for
Okay, it was
giving us your
really
time.
wonderful talking to everybody tonight. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. again.
Thank you.
Thank you
Okay.
again.
All right.
Good night.
Okay, goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye. Woohoo.
Wow.
Wow, man.
Great.
That was really cool.
Yeah.
That was the trip. Good idea, Jim.
Oh,
Thank you.
thanks for coming, you
Yay,
guys.
Jim.
Yeah, that was great. So glad you found and connected with her.
Let's
was
stop
great.
the recording and save it.
Yeah, for sure.
Cool.
Cool.
So
Very
you're
cool,
still
guys.
starting, right?